things that matter, that live, ones that walk, swim, fly, crawl, and grow. We have that connection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Smart has passed his time over to Mr. Morris. Go ahead.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to Mr. Simard.
Mr. George, you spoke a bit about theatrics, and I want to start by saying thank you to you and Chief McGuinness as well, because I think what I've heard from both of you throughout the last hour is coming from your heart, and I think this place is better when we have that. I also think, Mr. George, you asked a question of us in your testimony about our perspective, and so I wanted to start briefly on that. I live quite far from the pipeline. I live all the way out in Ontario. But for me, the decision to purchase the pipeline days after this government affirmed that we were, in fact, in a climate emergency is one of the reasons why I decided to run. It was devastating for me at that time. But I don't live near the pipeline the way you and your ancestors have for time immemorial. And so I admire the advocacy that your nation has pressed for so many years. I'm also just mindful that this committee heard for the second meeting in a row, this time from oil and gas CEOs, their quotes, "This is an undeniable win." One of them wasn't sure if CO2 caused climate at all, but he thought that Canada will enjoy the benefits of TMX for decades to come. It's a critical piece of infrastructure. Meanwhile, you've called it economic smallpox. I was wondering if, Mr. George, if you could reflect on what we've heard today from these CEOs, what does that bring up for you?
You know, it's baffling to me at the state of where we are today and where we continue to go. These tragedies are for sure not the new norm. It will progressively get worse. We have a hurricane right now in the southwest of the United States that's causing havoc. You know, I mentioned the fires. I mentioned all this. You know, what I think of, Mr. Maurice, is what my grandfather would think, Chief Dan George, if I tried to explain to him that there are 434 fires in British Columbia in one day at once, what an atmospheric river was of how the floods and the landslides cut off Vancouver from the rest of Canada for months, or to explain these hurricanes that are happening, that the change of weather, that the ice melts are melting, or even to have them to witness, to see how the tides even here have changed since his lifetime. You know, and to deny that they don't, when I spoke multiple times at the United Nations. I spoke multiple times at the United Nations, and many scientists explained how fossil fuels are responsible for this, and not to try to do something about it, and not to try to move forward, and not just as an industry, but also as leaders of Canada. Leaders of Canada, where we do, I just explained it, 188 hydrogen plants with 200 trucks, 100% green hydrogen. We could move in that direction. We would be leaders in the world of green energy if we took the money and spent it on something else. So how I feel, and it's baffling. It's baffling, but you know what I think of? Is everybody who's speaking, and including those, they're part of the human race. Because they're incapable of making sound decisions for themselves and their future generations. I'm doing my best to do that for them, to make sure our future generations have something.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. George. And I want to thank both witnesses for your testimony today and appearing for the study.